This is one of the most disturbing and distressing things I'll ever have to talk about. But if you're in the unfortunate position where your child makes a disclosure, there are some things you should know. For one thing, do not ask any questions. I'll explain why in a minute. You do not even react to what the child is actually telling you. In the meanwhile, you're recording it or you're writing it down word for word exactly as the child has said it. And with a bit of luck, you'll have someone there on another phone or whatever able to call the police for a Child Protection Unit officer, the CPU Child Protection Unit. That's the department that you need. They will send over a specially trained police officer and they will interview that child on their own, in a room on their own. And that testimony that that officer writes is 100% unequivocal evidence that what that child said may well have actually happened. It is valid evidence for a judge to look at, and no one in God's earth is ever going to argue with that statement. The danger is, and this is something that you notice social services do, and this is what they're taught to do. I know they were taught to do that because I went on the management course for social workers. And this is what they were told to do, and I was horrified. They said, oh, you can ask a question as long as it's not a leading question. That's absolute rubbish. I had an outburst in session where I was saying you should never ask any questions whatsoever, and I explained all this. And so if they're teaching social workers, deliberately teaching them to undermine an accusation of abuse, they know exactly what they're doing and why they do it. Moving back in my career, there was a time when I was working in bail hostels and I had the opportunity, I'll put a link below, and I had an opportunity to speak to these perpetrators alone, just one-to-one, no one else listening. And it was from those guys that I found out some of the things that they were doing actually were just unbelievable. I'll take these things to my grave because it was just so easy for them, dead simple. They defend against a child. Then one thing that they do for a start is they call themselves dad. They say, I'm your new dad. Call me dad. So that if anything does happen further down the line and people say, who did that to this young person? Then people will say, oh, the dad did it. Not knowing, of course, or not caring that it wasn't the actual biological father, because the chances of a biological father doing anything like this are so remote we don't even have the statistics. Admittedly, there are some perpetrators who do become fathers. It doesn't work the other way around. In fact, as soon as you become a father, you become more acute and more alert to anything like that. Any father will tell you the same thing. Suddenly you're vastly aware of the dangers. So what I'm saying is you don't ask any questions at all. Just write down what the child said, nothing else, nothing more. And that evidence from a police officer will get a conviction. Now, when these cases, there's so many cases that the social services can't possibly deal with them all. Thousands and thousands of them every day, every year. So the way that they process these allegations and disputes is to put them through the family court system. And another thing that the paedophiles used to do, because when I worked at the bail hostels, this came up quite a lot. When they got into the court, one of the things they would say is, well, this never happened, Your Honour. This was an accusation that was discussed with the child, and an idea was put into the child's head, and the whole event was misinterpreted as being a sexual assault. They have all their answers ready if they can prove that someone asked that child that question. So that's how they get away with it. So who gets blamed for it then? I'll tell you who gets blamed for it, and it won't surprise you one bit. There's one of the statistics that you should know of, that the chances of a father, a biological father, harming his own child are very, very extremely remote. In the majority of cases, such as Daniel Pelka, Baby Peter, and some of the other high-profile cases, they were reported as being the child's father, and that's not true. They weren't the child's father at all. It was the mother's boyfriends who did these things. But they will say, this is how perpetrators work, they will say to the child, They obviously pick on single one-parent homes. So they move it into the home, and straight away they say, oh, call me dad. So everybody reports it as being the dad who did these horrible, vile things to that child. And that's how they get away with it. And that's what convinces everybody that fathers are the worst offenders ever, which is not true. From my own experience, and believe me, this is the truth, the people, there are perpetrators who become fathers. That's fine. We can appreciate that. But it doesn't ever work the other way around. And one of the reasons being is because the whole idea is absolutely repulsive to a father. The proper biological father, or any biological father, will tell you the same story. The idea of harming your own child is just unbearable. You couldn't even think about it. So this is a big bone of contention that we have with the broadcast media. It's not just the government and everybody else, it's the actual people on social media sites who are saying these things. It's a few examples where the men were driven to suicide because people were accusing him of doing this harm to his child, and it wasn't, it was the mother's boyfriend. One of the reasons why these perpetrators get away with it so often is because people ask the child a leading question, or any question at all, and that'll be enough to negate the whole evidence, everything that was said and done. Another thing they do is they rely on people making complaints to the local authorities, which is absolutely the wrong thing to do. Because once you've made a complaint and you've exposed all this evidence, you'll never get it back into a criminal court, because you've already been telling everybody and sharing the evidence with everyone. So that's why you should keep it quiet and say nothing to anyone. Let the police deal with it. No matter what you might think of the police, they're all we've got, so we have to rely on them. We have no choice, and we have to trust them on this. So just tell the police and let them deal with it. I'm sure they're specially trained people working in the child protection unit. They know what to do. So the other thing is to keep your children safe by joining, and I'll put a link in the website below, but to join a parenting cooperative. One of the things that you'll notice from school, if someone is sexually assaulting your child, or they're maybe too embarrassed or too afraid to tell anyone about it, they will tell their friends. Now, if one of their friends is fortunate enough to have a parent who's part of a bigger cooperative, usually parents with children at the same school, they will phone each other. Don't ever put anything on social media, for goodness sake. So you phone each other privately and personally, and you have your network, and it's all private and personal stuff. You don't know who's on whose network. You just know you have a handful of whatever in your phone, and you go around and tell them, oh, this child is being assaulted. Then they will spread that around their 5 or 6 people, whoever they're quite close with, and whoever they trust, and they will share that with, and so on, until eventually there's a whole mass of people who are well aware of this child being assaulted at school, and that way the school have to deal with it. They would rather turn a blind eye, just hand it over to social services and forget about it. They don't want to deal with it. They don't want to admit that they're allowing children to sell these children drugs, making them sex slaves and thieves to pay for the drugs. And they're getting free samples so that they become addicted to it. And they don't want to admit that that's happening. That's why most of the children leaving school in some of these really bad areas, they've all got a drug habit. Because they were given drugs and they were told to sell drugs. And that's how the whole system works, to destroy young British children. And that's been going on for generations now. There are people who've had that experience themselves in childhood, and they're having children of their own going through the same routine. Everybody's too afraid to step into a school and say enough. Where are these drugs coming from? Who's giving out these free samples? But they won't deal with it. Getting back to the abuse scenario that we've had, the most frightening thing for me, and it should be for every father in the country, if your child was abused by the stepfather or friends and family of the mother, or somebody other than the actual biological father, that will go down on the child's medical records. If there is medical evidence, then that will be in the child's medical records, and it will be implied that the father did it. Now, as I've just been saying, that's what the defenders do. As soon as they move into a house, oh, call me dad. Who did that to you? Oh, my dad did it. That's how the system works for them. That's how they get away with it. Now, the reason why so many from all different walks of life, these guys get away with it every single time. And it's not just because the system's bent or they're all crooked, which is a big part of it. Yes, of course it is. But another part of it is what backs them up on this is that the person who gets blamed for this is the biological father in the family court system. Whether they know it or not, it is recorded as being the biological father. So if you've ever lost contact with your child, or if you've ever lost any kind of communication or relationship with your child, just check on your medical records to see if you were implicated or involved in any case of your child being abused. I'll put a diagram on the page which I've used several times, and it shows that from up to the 1960s there was a gradual increase, very, very narrow increase at the bottom, very gradual. Before then, this is before certain events, political events in the country, there was very little at all. It was one of the safest places. Britain was one of the safest places in the world up until that point. And it gradually got worse and worse. Then when it got to 1983, when they deliberately and maliciously destroyed all the working factories, all the working class people, all the working class villages and industries, coal, manufacturing, retail, all the different arts and crafts that people would pay for. No, these guys all went. You couldn't have handmade furniture anymore. So the whole working class structure, families were just destroyed, and this is where social services come in, because they were giving false evidence to the courts and to the judges to convince the judge that the fathers were perpetrating all these crimes against children. Now, for the most part, if there's no medical evidence, it just goes by, and if anybody mentions anything about it, well, it was the dad, wasn't it? Because that's what the perpetrator called himself. And like I've been saying, they get away with it so easily. The only problem for the social services is when there is some medical evidence of that child abuse. Who are they going to blame them? I'll give you 3 guesses. They might not say anything when it's going through the family court system, but when the family courts are finished with the case, you can bet, just have a look at either at your child's medical records or at your medical records, because that's the only thing you can access where you could see evidence that you were implicated in an injury or some kind of harm that happened to your child, and you will never know about it. So this is what you're up against. You might plead your innocence and you might shout and blame someone else. It doesn't matter. The fathers are the ones who are getting the blame, and that's why everybody has this completely distorted view about fathers in Britain and the UK. Now, I'll tell you something personal, a personal observation of mine when I first came to England. I was of an age where I was looking at girls and hopefully having a girlfriend and such. And one of the things that always put me on my guard was that all the girls that I knew had dads that were built like brick shithouses, and they protected their daughters. They were probably the most protective, devoted, loving fathers in the world. They never missed a trick. They knew everything. So nobody can tell me that they are the most likely perpetrators. They certainly are not. They're the least likely. And proof, if proof be needed, would be to look at the statistics for Ireland, where the same people, different accent, slightly different culture, but it's still a Christian culture. And and we're both Celts. That's the culture. So the thing to remember is that they have just as many men proportionately the same as everywhere else. What makes those men different is that they don't go blaming men for everything, every harm that happens to a child. Men are not the scapegoat in these things. People want the truth, and they trust each other, and they are loving, and every child is brought up, every young man is brought up to believe that they will be the head of a household at one point. They must protect and provide and do everything and be accountable and responsible for everything that happens to that family, to his own family, and to his neighbours' children. That's a big responsibility, and that's a massive burden to gradually place upon a child as they get older and older and older. And I know from experience that when there are big families, the older siblings take care of the younger siblings and so on down the line. They become fantastic parents. I remember an auntie saying to me, I think she's 7 children at the time, called everybody auntie then, but she had 7 children. She said the more children you have, the easier life gets, because they all make fantastic big brothers and big sisters and fantastic parents. They have been well experienced. So this is something that you need to get the safety aspect of bringing up a child and child rearing. You need to be absolutely clear about this. If you don't sort it out, and if you don't find out the truth, they will blame you. And remember, there are just as many female perpetrators as there are male, because this type of child abuse, it's actually like a preference. That you might prefer blondes or whatever. Well, imagine that only worse and more powerful, more motivating for these guys. It's not what the child looks like. It doesn't matter whether it's a boy or a girl from where they're standing. It depends on their age. That's what turns them on. And other people have other reasons. But take care, guys. It's getting to be an epidemic in this country, and it's time it must stop. Be aware, hyper aware. Watch this video again and just be super aware of the dangers and risks